From the moment I married Adam, I sensed there was something off about his relationship with his mother, Evelyn. On the surface, she was the perfect mother-in-law, gracious, charming, always quick with a smile or a kind word. But there was a distance between them, an unspoken tension that hung in the air whenever they were in the same room. I tried to brush it off as a typical mother-son dynamic, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. It wasn't until I found the letters that I realized just how deep those secrets ran. It all started one rainy Saturday afternoon. Adam was out, running errands, and I was at home, bored and curious. We had recently moved into a new house, and I decided to explore the attic, hoping to find some old treasures left behind by the previous owners. Instead, I found something far more disturbing. As I sifted through dusty boxes, I came across a small wooden chest hidden under a pile of old blankets. Intrigued, I opened it and found a stack of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was brittle, the ink smudged in places, but the words were still legible. I skimmed the first letter, my curiosity quickly turning to shock as I realized what I was reading. The letters were written by Evelyn, but they weren't addressed to Adam's father. They spoke of a love affair, one filled with passion and desperation, but also fear and regret. My heart pounded as I read about a child, her child, who was born in secret. Could this be Adam? Could Evelyn have hidden such a significant part of her life from him? By the time Adam came home, I was shaking. I knew I couldn't keep this from him, but I also had no idea how to tell him what I had found. When he walked into the living room, I was sitting on the couch, the letters spread out in front of me. "Hey, what's all this?" he asked, his voice light, but his eyes narrowing as he saw the papers. "Adam, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. "I found these in the attic. They're from your mom." He frowned, stepping closer to get a better look. When he saw the handwriting, his face drained of color. "Where did you find these?" he asked, his voice tight. "In a chest in the attic," I replied, swallowing hard. "Adam, they're love letters. But not from your dad. They talk about a child." He snatched the letters from the table, his hands shaking as he read through them. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating, as he absorbed the words. Finally, he dropped the letters onto the table, his face a mask of shock and confusion. This doesn't make sense," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom, she would have told me if something like this happened. She wouldn't have kept this from me." "Maybe she was trying to protect you," I offered, though I wasn't even sure what I was suggesting she was protecting him from. Adam shook his head, his eyes flashing with anger. No, this isn't about protection. This is a lie. My whole life. What else hasn't she told me?" I reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away, standing up abruptly. "I need to talk to her," he said, his voice shaking with a mix of fury and disbelief. "I need to hear her side of this." Before I could stop him, he grabbed his coat and stormed out of the house, leaving me alone with the letters and the horrible realization that our lives were about to change forever. As the door slammed behind him, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of uncovering something much darker than we could have ever imagined. The days after Adam stormed out were tense, filled with a silence that spoke volumes. He hadn't been able to confront Evelyn yet. Every time he tried, something stopped him. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the small, desperate hope that there was a reasonable explanation for the letters. Either way, the uncertainty was gnawing at both of us. But I couldn't let it rest. My curiosity had taken root, and I needed answers. I needed to know who the man in those letters was, and more importantly, What had happened to the child Evelyn had written about? If it was Adam, how could she have kept such a monumental secret from him? If it wasn't, then who was this other child? That Saturday, I visited Evelyn, determined to find something, anything, that could help us make sense of the situation. I told her I needed help with organizing the final details of our wedding, a convenient excuse to spend time at her house. She welcomed me with open arms, her usual warmth and charm on full display, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in my gut. As she busied herself in the kitchen, preparing tea, I excused myself to use the bathroom. But instead of heading there, I quietly made my way upstairs to her bedroom. The guilt of sneaking around tugged at me, but the need for answers was stronger. I began searching through her drawers, careful not to disturb anything too much. Jewelry, scarves, a few old trinkets, nothing unusual. But then I found it, a small dusty box at the back of her closet. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a collection of old photographs and keepsakes. I sifted through them until I came across a photograph that made my heart stop. It was a picture of a man I didn't recognize, holding a baby in his arms. The man was handsome, with dark hair and a serious expression. But it was the baby that caught my attention. The baby's eyes, bright, piercing blue, were unmistakably Adam's. As I stared at the photo, I felt a chill run down my spine. Who was this man? And why was he holding Adam as a baby? Just as I was about to close the box, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Panicking, I quickly shoved the photograph back into the box and returned it to its place. I barely had time to straighten up before Evelyn entered the room. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly as she noticed the faint traces of dust on my hands. "Yes, just freshening up," I replied, forcing a smile. "I was actually admiring the decor in your bedroom. You have such exquisite taste." Evelyn's eyes softened and she smiled. "Thank you, dear. This room holds a lot of memories." I couldn't help but wonder if those memories included the man in the photograph. But I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. That night, when Adam came home, I showed him the photograph I had taken from Evelyn's box. He stared at it, his face a mask of confusion and fear. "Who is this?" I asked softly. "Do you recognize him?" Adam shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, I've never seen him before. But that's me. That's me as a baby." The weight of his words hung in the air between us. If Adam didn't recognize the man, then who was he? And why was Evelyn hiding this photograph? What if this man, what if he's my real father? Adam's voice trembled as he spoke, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and despair. What if everything my mother told me was a lie? "We don't know that yet," I said, trying to comfort him, though I wasn't sure I believed my own words. "But we need to find out the truth. We need to talk to your mother." Adam nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He was terrified of what we might uncover, and I couldn't blame him. We were standing on the edge of a precipice, about to plunge into a darkness neither of us was prepared for. But there was no turning back now. The secrets of Evelyn's past were unraveling, and we had no choice but to follow the threads, no matter where they led. Adam and I spent the next few days in a haze of tension, both of us tiptoeing around the inevitable confrontation with Evelyn. We knew we couldn't avoid it forever, but the weight of what we might discover was almost paralyzing. Every time the phone rang, or there was a knock at the door, I could see Adam's whole body tense, as if bracing for the impact of what was to come. Finally, one evening, we decided we couldn't wait any longer. Adam called his mother and asked her to come over, saying we needed to talk. His voice was calm, almost too calm, and I could see the effort it took for him to maintain that composure. When Evelyn arrived, she was her usual self, smiling, warm, with that air of grace she always carried. But as soon as she stepped into our living room, she sensed that something was wrong. "Adam, darling, what's going on?" Evelyn asked, her smile faltering as she looked between the two of us. Adam didn't waste any time. He handed her the photograph I had found, watching her reaction closely. "Who is this man, Mom? And why do you have a picture of him holding me as a baby?" Evelyn's face went pale as she stared at the photograph, her hand trembling slightly. She didn't answer right away, her eyes clouded with emotions that I couldn't quite decipher. For a moment, the room was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Evelyn's shaky breath. Finally, she looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Adam, I was hoping you'd never have to see this," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "But I suppose it's time you knew the truth." "Truth?" Adam's voice was sharp, almost angry. "What truth, Mom? Who is this man?" Evelyn hesitated, as if she paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. But there was a darkness in him, Adam, a darkness I didn't see until it was too late. He became controlling, possessive, and when I found out I was pregnant, things took a turn for the worse. Adam's expression hardened. "So you ran away?" "Yes," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew I couldn't stay with him. I was terrified of what he might do, to me and to you. So I left. I changed my name, moved to a different town, and did everything I could to disappear from his life. I met your father shortly after, and he was everything Charles wasn't. Kind, loving, patient. He knew about my past, but he never judged me for it. He accepted you as his own." I could see Adam struggling to process what he was hearing. The betrayal was written all over his face, a mixture of anger, sadness, and confusion. "So my whole life has been a lie?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "You let me believe that Dad was my real father, that our family was normal, when all along—" Evelyn reached out to touch his hand, but he pulled away, standing up and pacing the room. "I did it to protect you, Adam," she said, her voice breaking. "I wanted you to have a normal life, free from the darkness of my past. I never wanted you to know the kind of man Charles was." "But he's my father," Adam shouted, turning to face her. "You can't just erase that part of my life. You can't pretend it never happened." "I know," Evelyn said softly, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I see how much I'd hurt you. I just wanted to keep you safe." I stepped in then, trying to bring some calm to the situation. "Evelyn, why did you keep the photograph? Why not destroy it if you were trying to leave that life behind?" Evelyn sighed, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to age her. "I kept it as a reminder," she said quietly. "A reminder of what I had to do to protect my child. I thought if I kept that memory alive, I would never forget why I left, and I would never go back." Adam shook his head, the conflict evident in his expression. "So what now? Is he still out there, Mom? Is Charles still alive?" Evelyn's face darkened. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't heard from him in years. But the fact that you found these letters and this photograph, it makes me wonder if the past is coming back to haunt us." The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Adam and I exchanged a look, both of us realizing that this was far from over. We had uncovered the truth, but in doing so, we had opened a door to a past that might still have the power to destroy us. As Evelyn sat there, broken and remorseful, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of foreboding. The shadows of Evelyn's past were closing in, and we were all about to be caught in their grip. The revelation about Charles sent shockwaves through our lives. The tension that had settled in our home after Evelyn's confession was palpable, thick like a storm cloud, ready to burst. Adam and I were barely speaking. Our once happy home had become a minefield of unspoken emotions and unresolved questions. Adam was torn between anger and heartbreak. He couldn't look at his mother the same way, and I could see the toll it was taking on him. The man he had thought was his father wasn't, and the mother he had idolized had kept a life-altering secret from him. It was as if the foundation of his very identity had been shattered. One evening, I found Adam in the garage, mindlessly tinkering with the car engine. It was something he did when he needed to think, to process. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. The man I loved was drowning in a sea of confusion, and I didn't know how to help him. "Adam," I finally said, breaking the silence, "we need to talk." He didn't look up, just kept working on the engine. "What's there to talk about, Emily? Everything I thought I knew is a lie." I walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. "We can't keep avoiding this. We need to figure out what we're going to do. You need to decide if you want to find Charles." Adam's hand froze, gripping the wrench tightly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain that cut deep. "What could that do? If he's alive, what would I even say to him? Hey, I'm the son you never knew you had, the son my mother ran away with because she was terrified of you." He shook his head, the bitterness in his voice clear. "I don't even know if I want to find him." "I understand," I said softly, though I knew that was only partially true. How could I fully understand what he was going through? "But you deserve to know the whole truth. Maybe finding him would give you the closure you need." Adam sighed, leaning against the car. "And what about my mom? How do I even look at her now? Every time I see her, all I can think about is the lies. She built our whole life on a lie, Emily." "I know," I whispered, reaching out to hold his hand. "But she did it because she thought it was the only way to protect you. That doesn't make it right, but maybe it helps explain why." Adam was quiet for a long time, lost in his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. I just wish she had trusted me enough to tell me the truth sooner. I grew up thinking one thing, and now it's all being ripped away." He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine. "What would you do, Emily? If you were in my shoes, would you want to find him?" I hesitated, knowing my answer wouldn't be easy to hear. If it were me, I think I'd need to know. Even if it hurt, even if it was messy. I'd need to know where I came from, to understand my past, so I could move forward. Adam nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," he admitted. "But maybe you're right. Maybe I need to know, even if it's just to close this chapter of my life." The next day, we went to Evelyn's house. Adam had called her earlier, saying we needed to talk. I could tell from his tone that he was still hurt, but there was a determination there too, a need for answers that couldn't be ignored any longer. Evelyn greeted us at the door, her eyes red and puffy from crying. The sight of her, so vulnerable and remorseful, softened some of the anger in Adam's eyes, but the tension was still there. "Adam, Emily," Evelyn said quietly, stepping aside to let us in. "I'm so sorry for everything." Adam didn't respond, his jaw clenched as he walked past her into the living room. I followed, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. Once we were seated, Evelyn took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what was to come. "I know you must hate me right now," she began, her voice trembling. "And I don't blame you. I should have told you the truth years ago, Adam. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was only hurting you." Adam looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I need to know everything, Mom. No more lies, no more half-truths. I need to know who Charles is, and why you were so afraid of him." Evelyn nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Charles was dangerous. He wasn't always like that, but as our relationship progressed, he became more and more controlling. He wanted to dictate every aspect of my life: who I talked to, where I went, even what I wore. It got worse when I found out I was pregnant with you. He became possessive, paranoid. He would follow me, accuse me of things I hadn't done. I was scared, Adam, scared for my life, and for yours. She paused, taking a shaky breath. When I realized I couldn't stay with him, I made the hardest decision of my life. I left everything behind, changed my name, and started over. I thought if I could just keep you away from him, we could have a normal life. And for a while we did. Your father, your stepfather, was a good man, and he loved you as his own. I thought I could leave the past behind, but it was always there, lurking in the shadows. Adam listened in silence, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "And you never thought to tell me any of this. You never thought I deserved to know the truth." "I was afraid," Evelyn admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I was afraid that if you knew, it would destroy the life we had built. I was afraid that if Charles ever found out where we were, he would come after us. I didn't want you to live in fear, Adam. I wanted you to have a chance at a normal life." Adam stood up, pacing the room as he processed her words. "But now I'm living in fear anyway," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "Fear of the unknown, fear of what's out there waiting for me. You took away my choice, Mom. You took away my right to know where I came from." Evelyn broke down then, sobbing into her hands. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I can't change the past, Adam, but I can help you now. If you want to find Charles, I'll do whatever I can to help you. I owe you that much." Adam stopped pacing, his eyes locked on his mother. For a moment, I thought he might lash out again, but then his expression softened, the anger giving way to a deep, aching sadness. "I don't know what I want," he said quietly. "I don't know if I want to find him, or if I just want to forget this ever happened. But I do know that things can't go back to the way they were. Too much has changed." Evelyn nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I understand. Just know that whatever you decide, I'm here for you. I love you, Adam. I always have, and I always will." Adam didn't respond, just turned and walked out of the room. I followed him, my heart heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. As we drove home in silence, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end for our family. The secrets had been exposed, but the damage had been done. We were a family divided, and I wasn't sure if we could ever be whole again. After the emotional confrontation with Evelyn, Adam's mood shifted from anger to a quiet, simmering determination. The uncertainty of his past gnawed at him, and despite his initial reluctance, he realized that he couldn't move forward without uncovering the full truth. The shadow of Charles loomed too large over his life, and it was time to confront it, no matter how painful it might be. One evening, after days of tense silence, Adam finally turned to me as we sat on the couch, the TV playing in the background, though neither of us was really watching. "Emily," he said, his voice resolute, "I've made up my mind. I need to find him. I need to find Charles." I looked at him, my heart heavy with concern. "Are you sure, Adam?" This could open up a whole new set of problems. What if he's dangerous? What if? I know, Adam interrupted, his expression hardening. But I can't live with the what-ifs anymore. I need to know who he is, where he is, and why my mom was so scared of him. I need to know if he's still a threat. I nodded, understanding his need for closure. How do you want to start? We could hire a private investigator, look through public records, anything that might give us a lead. I've already been looking into it, Adam admitted, surprising me. I found an investigator online, someone who specializes in tracking down people who don't want to be found. I'm meeting with him tomorrow. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I'm with you, Adam. Whatever you need, I'm here. The next day, we met with the investigator, a gruff, no-nonsense man named Roy Davis. His office was small and cluttered, filled with stacks of papers and old case files. He looked us over with a keen eye, clearly assessing the seriousness of our request. So, Roy began, leaning back in his creaky chair. You're looking for this Charles guy. You got a full name, date of birth, anything else to go on? Adam handed over the old photograph of Charles, holding him as a baby, along with the letters we had found. His name is Charles Monroe. I don't have an exact date of birth, but he would be in his late 50s or early 60s by now. He used to live in another town. My mom's old name was Evelyn Carter, if that helps. Roy studied the photograph for a moment, then glanced through the letters. This is a start, he said, nodding. I'll dig around, see what I can find. But I got to warn you, sometimes the truth isn't what you want to hear. Adam's jaw tightened and he nodded. I know. I'm ready for whatever comes. For the next week, we waited in a state of anxious anticipation. Every time the phone rang, my heart would skip a beat, wondering if it was Roy with news. Adam was restless, spending long hours in his home office, scrolling through old documents, articles, anything that might give him a clue. Finally, the call came. Roy's voice on the other end was grim. Adam, I've found him. We need to talk. We met Roy at his office the next morning, my stomach in knots the entire drive there. Adam was silent, his face set in a mask of determination. When we arrived, Roy wasted no time. Charles Monroe, Roy began, sliding a file across the desk to us. I found him, but it's not good news. Adam opened the file with trembling hands, revealing a series of old newspaper clippings and police reports. The headlines told the story: local businessman accused of domestic violence, mysterious disappearance of Charles Monroe, and finally, unsolved murder linked to missing suspect. Adam's face drained of colour as he read the articles. Murder, he whispered, disbelief in his voice. Roy nodded solemnly. Charles Monroe was a suspect in a murder case back in the early 1990s, right around the time your mom disappeared. A woman he was involved with was found dead, but before the police could bring him in, he vanished. No one's seen him since. I felt a chill run down my spine. So he could still be out there. Maybe, Roy said, his tone grim. Or maybe he's dead, and we just don't know it. Either way, this guy was bad news. Your mom had good reason to be scared. Adam was shaking his head, his eyes wide with shock. But why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she warn me about this? Maybe she thought she was protecting you, Roy suggested. Or maybe she was just too scared to bring it up, afraid that talking about him would somehow bring him back into your lives. Adam stood up abruptly, pacing the small office, his mind clearly racing. So what do we do now? If he's out there, if he's still alive? "We need to be careful," Roy warned. "If he is alive, tracking him down could be dangerous. But we could keep digging, see if we can find any trace of him. Just know that this is a man who's been hiding for decades. If he doesn't want to be found, it won't be easy." Adam looked at me then, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "Emily, I can't stop now. I have to know. But if this gets too dangerous, I don't want you involved." I shook my head, stepping closer to him. "We're in this together, Adam. I'm not going anywhere." Roy cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "I'll keep looking, but you should be prepared for whatever we find, or don't find. If this guy's still out there, he's either living under the radar, or he's long gone. Either way, it's not going to be easy." As we left Roy's office, the weight of the situation settled heavily on us. The darkest truth was now in the open. Charles wasn't just a figure from Evelyn's past. He was a dangerous man with a violent history. And now we were closer than ever to uncovering whatever was left of him. But the fear that had been nagging at me since the beginning of this journey was stronger than ever. What if finding Charles brought more than just answers? What if it brought danger, or even more pain? As Adam and I drove home in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of something terrible, something that might change our lives forever. That night, as we lay in bed, Adam turned to me, his voice barely a whisper in the dark. "Emily, if something happens, if we find him, and it's bad—" "Don't," I interrupted, placing a finger on his lips. "Don't think like that. We'll face whatever comes together." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. We were venturing into unknown territory, chasing a ghost from the past who had the power to destroy everything we held dear. The darkest truth was out there, waiting for us, and we had no choice but to keep moving forward, even as the shadows closed in around us.